In any big operation, a chemical plant, an oil rig, you name it, change is the one thing you can always count on. It's how we innovate, how we improve. So it's never really a question of if things will change, but when. And, more importantly, how you're going to manage the risk that comes along with it. And yeah, that's really the heart of the matter, isn't it? Think about it. Every single time you alter a piece of equipment or update a procedure or even just change a team's structure, you run the risk of creating a brand new, totally unforeseen hazard. So how do you manage that risk without slowing everything to a crawl? Well, the answer is to have a structured, really disciplined system in place. And that, right there, is where the whole concept of management of change comes into play. And that word on the screen, before, that is absolutely the most important part of this whole thing. See, MOC isn't about looking back after an incident and figuring out what went wrong. Nope, it's all about being proactive. It's a system to rigorously review any proposed change to make sure it's safe before you ever turn a wrench or write a new line of code. So what are we really trying to do here? Well, it boils down to these 4 key objectives. First, you stop new unexpected hazards from popping up. Second, you make sure you're not making any existing risks even worse. Third, and this one is huge, you let everybody who might be affected know what's going on. And finally, you keep all your important paperwork, your procedures, your safety info, totally up to date. Put them all together and you've got a pretty solid safety net. And this visual gives you a great idea of where a MOC fits into the bigger picture. It doesn't just float out there on its own. It's a central pillar, holding up the entire process safety management system. You can see it right there in the middle, under Manage Risk. And look how it's connected to everything else, from your day-to-day operating procedures all the way to how you handle emergencies. Now, it's easy to think MOC is just for, big physical pieces of equipment, right? But a truly strong safety culture, man, it applies this thinking to absolutely everything. So let's break down all the different kinds of changes we're talking about. And the scope here is, well, it's massive. You've got your technical changes, like installing a new valve. Then there are procedural changes, like altering a startup sequence. You can even have an organizational change, like shuffling a team's responsibilities. Here's the bottom line. If it can possibly impact process safety, it has to go through MOC, period. Okay, this right here is a really, really important distinction to make. A permanent change is just that. It becomes the new normal. But a temporary change, that can be one of the riskiest things you ever do in a plant. It has to have a strict time limit, say 90 days, and you absolutely need a clear exit strategy. You either go back to the way things were or you make it permanent through a full MOC review. Because temporary can never ever be allowed to mean, well, just forget about it. Okay, so how does this actually work? How do you take an idea for a change and turn it into something that's real and, more importantly, safe? Let's walk through what we call the MOC life cycle. It's all built around this 5-stage process. It all kicks off with initiation. That's where someone identifies the need for a change. From there, it goes to approval, where the experts dig in and analyze the risks. Once that's good to go, you move to engineering for all the detailed design work. Then comes the big one, implementation. This is when the change actually happens, and it has to end with a final pre-startup safety review, a PSSR, to make sure it's 100% safe to run. And finally, and you can't skip this part, is the closeout. This is where you double and triple check that every single thing is done, documented, and signed off on. So that's the theory, right? It all sounds good on paper, but to really get why MOC is so non-negotiable, we have to look at what happens when it goes wrong. And there's probably no more tragic or powerful example of that than the Flixboro disaster. So picture this. It's a Saturday afternoon, June 1st, 1974. A huge chemical plant in a quiet part of England is just gone, wiped off the map. The explosion was absolutely devastating. It killed 28 people and injured dozens more. And the cause? It all came down to a single, terribly managed change. Okay, so here's the breakdown. The plant had this series of 6 reactors all linked together. One of them gets a crack, so they pull it out for repairs. But to keep the plant running, they decided to rig up a temporary bypass pipe to connect the other reactors. And this is the key. This seemingly simple fix was done completely outside of any formal change management process. It was a total shortcut. There was no real engineering, no formal risk approval, nothing. Just a couple of people making an on-the-spot decision without fully understanding the incredible forces they were dealing with. And tragically, that temporary pipe, it failed. It ruptured, releasing this massive, massive cloud of flammable cyclohexane, which then found an ignition source. This quote from the investigation really just says it all. The change at Flixborough is the poster child for an MOC failure. It skipped every single one of those 5 stages we just talked about. So, to make sure something like Flixborough never happens again, you need 2 things. You need people to have really clear roles, and you need a system that's always checking in on itself to make sure it's actually working. At the end of the day, a process is only as good as the people running it. First, you have the initiator. That can be anybody who sees the need for a change. Then you have the MOC coordinator. Think of them as the quarterback, the one who guides the whole thing through the system from start to finish. And then you have the MOC committee. This is your team of experts, engineers, operators, safety pros, who look at the change from every possible angle to make sure nothing gets missed. And one last thing, the system itself has to be held accountable. It needs to police itself. And you do that by tracking key data points, your KPIs. So you're looking at things like, how long does it take to get a change approved? Are things getting stuck somewhere? And you're especially watching those temporary changes like a hawk. And look, the point of this data isn't to point fingers. It's to find the weak spots in your own system so you can make it better and stronger. So let's leave you with this final thought. The next time you or someone on your team talks about a quick fix or a temporary workaround, I want you to stop and ask yourself the question on the screen. Because if there's one thing we've learned from decades of process safety history, it's this. The most dangerous changes, they're almost always the ones we convince ourselves are too small or too temporary to matter.